Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. It seems the Red Bull front bib drama is not going away anytime soon, with Mercedes' Toto Wolff suggesting the device is outrageous compared to what the other teams on the grid have, but also McLaren boss Zak Brown suggesting all the Red Bull employees sign a letter to say that they never used it for a competitive advantage by breaking parc fermé, as was discussed by McLaren over the last few days. If they don't do this, as you wouldn't exactly expect Red Bull to, does it say anything about whether there was actually something illegal going on? Very much into your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. Plenty to get into today as ever. Firstly, on further fallout on this Lando Norris versus Max Verstappen incident, and this is going to be talked about all up until the Mexico City Grand Prix, and likely for some time to come after that, until the FIA may or may not make changes to the way these regulations in terms of the driving standards are currently written. Now, Lando says he needed to defend harder into turn 1. He drove like a muppet, he says. And at the end of the day, if Lando loses this championship, which he probably will, he won't have, deserved to win it, right? There's been plenty of cases where he just needed to race harder. And I think against Max, on some level, you've got to fight fire with fire. Hamilton did it to some degree in 2021. I think when Leclerc races Max, it's hard but fair racing. Lando has historically and has continued to probably not race him as hard as you need to race Max. If you don't race Max hard, he's gonna take advantage of it, and he's gonna school you a lot of the time because he knows what he can get away with in terms of the rules. Whether those rules are fair, that is the big debate. But Lando knows that he needs to have more of a killer instinct, I think, is the fundamental thing. We saw it from Oscar Piastri back in Baku. And we've seen it from all the great champions over the years. They've got this mentality, they've got this instinct of, taking advantage of opportunities. And Lando doesn't really have that. This was, in many respects, given the circumstances of the season, maybe the worst turn 1 blunder so far, leading from pole this season from Lando. And there have been other examples, unfortunately, for him. But it is still a question. McLaren decided, by the way, not to protest this. They say, all right, whatever. The stewards, I guess, are right. And the stewards, I talk about the inconsistencies yesterday, and there's definitely inconsistencies, but technically, based on the way the rules are being written and the way that Verstappen is interpreting them, what the stewards decided was fair. Lando went off track, took advantage of it, overtook outside the white lines. That is a 5-second penalty. Now, why he was there in the first place was because Verstappen put him there. And of course, that's perfectly fine, apparently, according to the rules. So of course, this occurred to many of us over the last couple of days, but I thought I'd do a bit of a deeper dive into it today, really, that this incident echoes in many ways the famous Brazil 2021 incident between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, where inexplicably to many, Max somehow didn't get a penalty for this. Of course, Hamilton was trying to overtake. Max just went so deep into the corner, was ahead at the apex, congratulations, because he decided to take an entirely different racing line. And in this case, Max stayed ahead, Lewis stayed behind, and there was no further action. Now, this is what would have happened had Lando stayed behind. If Lando decided not to overtake Max and therefore just slot in behind him, then presumably the stewards would have done the same thing here, which is say no further action, which seemed so remarkable at the time. And I think that of any of the takeaways from 2021, of course, there was Massey and Abu Dhabi and all that drama. But if there was anything that needed to be changed after 2021, it was the driving standards rules, because Max was able to do and get away with stuff which just shouldn't be fair. At the end of the day, this sport should be about racing against other cars without making contact within the confines of the track. That is like the crux of Grand Prix racing. There's no other way to put it. It just feels like such a slight to the entire context of racing and the World Championship battle in and of itself, that stuff like this was allowed. And I think it was a general feeling in the community that, there's no way this should be allowed going forward. If you force another driver off the track while yourself going off track, even if you were ahead at the apex, it shouldn't have mattered. But seemingly nothing has actually changed. I think there was maybe a feeling that after this season, the stewards saw things differently, but apparently they don't, because it was just the same thing that happened again, even, less extreme this time, right? Because Max isn't off the track by 4 car widths, he's off the track by a car width or half a car width or something, but still, the point still applies. In this case, Lando goes in front and gets a 5-second penalty for taking advantage off the track, but had he slotted in, presumably the rules haven't changed since 2021, but it just doesn't seem like good rules to me, right? I mean, this is another shot of exactly the same thing. So there's been some controversy about this. Lando, of course, wasn't happy and says, look, when racing Max, you got to commit yourself. People may not understand that, but you can't go into the battle half-hearted wholeheartedly against him. I did that maybe a bit after the start of the first corner. I enjoyed our fight. It was respectful, but of course it was a massive momentum killer not getting third place in the race. Now, there's a bit of drama after the race, of course, between Jenson Button and Christian Horner, because Button was very much on, my wavelength here, saying that the rule needs to change. If you push a car off the track and you also go off the track, then they need a rule to prevent that, right? Because as it stands, Max and the defending car in these instances is able to do whatever they want. If Max is overtaking, he can, send it down the inside and stuff like that. I mean, of course, that's what happens back in 2021 Abu Dhabi, first lap, right? When Verstappen sends a massive dive bomb down the inside of Hamilton. Hamilton goes off the track, keeps the position. And that was Hamilton's position to keep, and by the same rules that we've discussed this weekend, because Verstappen made the corner, but he forced Hamilton off the track, and it was the same thing in that Austria incident earlier in the year when Norris went down the inside, forced Max off the track, and Max then kept the position. And you might argue that that's fair enough, but if that's fair enough, then it can't also be the case the other way around, that the defender just has all the advantages, when they can just freely go off the track if they get pushed off and keep the position, or they can hold the inside line, push the other driver off the track without even making the corner, and it's a track limits violation. Max just, are you telling me that Max just happens to go wide this lap? That still seems to be what the regulations here in Formula 1 for driving standards imply, is that on this occasion, Max just, I guess he just broke a bit deep, didn't he? Just made a mistake that corner and happened to go 4 car widths off the track. And the same technical ruling is applied. Like for Max, this went down as a track limits violation. This did not go down as any sort of driving standards infringement. And if you can get away with it, why wouldn't you? And I think this is the point, really, that if there was 20 Max Verstappens on the track, I don't know how many drivers have finished the race. I mean, there might be 10, 5, 15, I don't know. Every Grand Prix, if there were 10 Maxes on the track, we'd be seeing collisions, we'd be seeing incidents, it'd be chaos, right? And there aren't many drivers that push the rules like this, and Max has done so ever since he's come into the sport. He knows the rules. He knows that he can stay ahead at the apex, push the guy off the track, go off track himself and get away with it. So why wouldn't he, right? But also, why wouldn't other drivers? They've got to realise this too. And I'm happy that Lando stayed ahead and he took the penalty, although, of course, for McLaren and Lando it's bad, but it's meant that this is a discussion, right? It's brought it up again. If Lando just slotted in and tried to overtake again, as Hamilton successfully did back in 2021 Brazil, we wouldn't be having this conversation, but we are, because the penalty was caused. And Horner was responding, and pretty much all Horner could say to Button when Button was like, this is ridiculous, we need to change the rules, Horner was like, well, it's black and white, the rules are the rules, and Lando overtook off the track, and Horner's not wrong that technically, yeah, sure, but Horner didn't have a response to say, no, actually Max is driving fairly for XYZ reason. I think it's quite clear to everyone that what happened was not fair, at least in my opinion. Maybe you guys disagree, but I think that'll be a rare take if you believe that, even this incident, if you believe this is fair defending, then I feel like you're watching the wrong sport. And as I say, it's not necessarily Max's fault. It's the same thing that Schumacher did back in his day, pushing the rules to their absolute limit and, occasionally going over the line. And then when you get punished for that, it is another question, of course. But I think that is the debate. And it's not like Horner could defend Max and say, oh, well, he was driving perfectly fairly. His defence was that, well, the rules are the rules and therefore the decision was made, which is a fair defence. But equally, it's not like even Red Bull can argue that Max's driving style is reasonable in these cases. That's not what they're arguing. And I think for understandable reasons. And I thought it was relevant that this guy here on the Reddit today put together a list of all of the rule changes that have happened since Verstappen has come into the sport, since 2016, basically. And, given we're having this talk again today and have done over the last couple of days, there's a very realistic chance, I would say, that the FIA are seriously reconsidering. They've got to, right, the way that the driving standards regulations are written, because if they weren't changed after Brazil 2021, you've got to think they should be at least considered to be changed in Austin 2024, because, these problems have been a thing for a while, but because Max has been in these title fights over these, those couple of seasons, 21, 24 especially, it's a big deal again, and it's something the regulators will have to think about. And, I mean, look at all the things Right, moving under braking, dangerous defensive maneuvers, minimum age requirements, of course, for Max, use of alternate lines and track limits. Like, there have been multiple changes over the last decade that have been caused by Max Verstappen. Of course, famously over the last couple of years was, look at all this stuff. Double yellow flag compliance, technical regulations on rear wings during the Brazil Grand Prix, clarification on forcing a driver off the track. Of course, that was the incident at turn 4, and they issued a guideline, a clarification to say if an overtaking car is significantly alongside, the defending driver must leave at least one width of car space. Driver must not deliberately force another driver off the track. But, sure, that's what they say. Whether they apply that, this is the thing, isn't it? It's like the stewards say one thing, but sometimes they do another. The brake testing drama in Abu Dhabi, there was a clarification there. Even the last couple of years, the pit lane exits, Singapore, Monaco Grand Prix, hiding at the end of the pit lane, preventing the drivers from, going past him, right? Obviously, Max does the thing that he overtakes people in the pit lane, right? Like, Max pushes the boundaries everywhere. And on some level, I really appreciate it because it means that the sport gets entertaining and, people make changes. But I just wish that, the FIA and the stewards were more hot on the boil in terms of actually making necessary changes. Of course, there was also the safety car restart thing, right? When Verstappen would go right up to the side of the lead driver before a safety car restart, and then that was banned because of him. So there have been so many rule changes because of Max, and this may be another one. I mean, we'll see if time says anything on that. Marco made an interesting comment as well, saying that Max is like a squirrel. They pick up every nut they see lying around. When it comes to World Championship points, Max has the same philosophy, and he's bang on of it. It's an interesting analysis, but yeah, I mean, he's not wrong. Like, Max is so hard to beat, and even next season, Max might have the third fastest car. I mean, who knows? McLaren, Ferrari, they could produce a really good car. Max is still going to be so hard to beat in the championship, partially because he's so hard to overtake. As we have seen this past weekend, you've got to stay ahead of him, you've got to get ahead, then you've got to stay ahead, and that is already a challenge. A couple of things around the world before we talk about the Red Bull front bib drama. Christian Horner, understandably, gave lots of praise to Liam Lawson's performance. He kind of nailed it this weekend, right? Started at the back, started on the hard tyres, did a great one-stop, overcut Yuki Tsunoda, and ends up sticking himself into P9 with a couple of points, not far behind Perez. And he was beefing with Fernando Alonso on track the whole weekend, which is only, raising his profile on some level. So that was a funny drama. We didn't really get much time to discuss this weekend, Alonso versus Lawson, but expect that to continue going forwards. There is also discussion here from Autosport that Honda really want to get Yuki a test in the Red Bull. This is the point, really, that Red Bull, maybe they're only keeping Yuki because, it's kind of an appeasement to Honda on some level, their engine supplier. My opinion is they should be keeping Yuki because he's a better driver than Perez. They should put him in the main Red Bull, but they might not do that. Apparently, though, they may well give him like his first ever test. I don't know if Yuki's like actually ever driven a Red Bull, which is kind of wild to think, given the fact that, Lawson and other drivers have been in a Red Bull car. I don't know if that's ever actually happened for Yuki, so he's going to get a first test with the team apparently after Abu Dhabi. But of course, after Abu Dhabi, it might be too late for his future at Red Bull if, let's say, Lawson were to get the drive. But to be fair, if Lawson were to do enough over Tsunoda from now to the end of the season to get the drive, then he would probably also deserve it. Ferrari, couple of interesting things. They're trying to make further progress. I mean, a 1-2 this weekend kind of came out of nowhere, right? I don't think people were massively expecting Ferrari to come out and deliver this kind of performance. I thought they'd be strong, but again, in quali, they were 2-3 tenths off the pace. When it came to race pace, though, again, a rather different story. And there are further upgrades. There were rumours about them potentially bringing something to Mexico. They now say there's another thing they're going to bring in Qatar, and they're actually very optimistic about their development trajectory right now. One thing, though, is that if Leclerc wants to win this Drivers' Championship, or if Ferrari want to win the Constructors, they've got to close up points quickly. Mexico is a key example of a race where you can be able to do that, right? But Ferrari historically have not been good there, really, mainly because they choose a small turbo. So Ferrari's turbo is certainly smaller than many others on the grid. And that has its advantages, but one of its disadvantages is that in conditions where there is not much air, as in there's thin air, thin atmosphere, as there is at the very high altitude in the Mexico City Grand Prix, then they can struggle. And on power, it's been a big problem for them on the long straight over the last couple of years. So if that continues, then I wouldn't expect Ferrari to win this weekend, I think is the point. And if Leclerc doesn't win this weekend, probably it is championship over for him. Technically, it's not championship over, but I just thought this is funny because a lot of McLaren fans, a lot of Lando fans are kind of giving up, right? They're saying, oh, well, 57 points or whatever over 5 rounds, it's not going to happen. And the funny thing is that apparently people have calculated that Charles Leclerc has has something like a 2.7% chance to win the championship. And, you know, the Tifosi are all over it, right? They're like, oh my God, a lot of McLaren and Lando fans have given up. A lot of Shell fans are saying, well, you know what, 79 points in 5 races, we can do it, you know, like Charles is going to do it. And it's possible, but he has to close up by 15 points on max around, which is obviously a challenge. But let's talk about this front bib drama, right? So you guys may have seen it this past weekend, before the weekend. This is the front bib, the T-tray, as it's often described, the splitter at the front of the car. And this is an aerodynamic element which the teams can adjust up and down when they make their setup changes. The way that 90% of the teams make these changes is outside the car. They have some sort of tool that they apply outside of the car, and they move this element up and down. Red Bull make that adjustment in the cockpit, deep in the driver footwell. They have to reach in with like a stick, and they make the adjustment there. So the argument was, now first of all, McLaren found out about this apparently because former Red Bull staff who now work for McLaren basically snitched and said, hey, we should tell on them for this. Maybe in retaliation for Red Bull talking to the FIA about the flexible rear wing that McLaren had in Baku that they've now had to clarify for races such as Las Vegas. And maybe in retaliation, McLaren were like, okay, we're going to get them for something as well. The question though really was, why do Red Bull do it like this? Why do they have this, let's say ride height adjustment factor hidden away within the car when they could change it from the outside? The implication from McLaren was that they were potentially tweaking their ride height under parc ferme conditions, which of course is very illegal under the regulations, to mean that they could compromise much better. They didn't have to compromise basically between qualifying and race conditions when the car gets heavier with more fuel and stuff like that. So it was a big drama this weekend that it was discovered. Red Bull say there's literally nothing to it because we can't even change it while the car is fully put together, and they showed how they have to take off the front nose cone, they have to take off this front panel to make the adjustment, and the FIA seemingly bought it, but the FIA did nonetheless put a seal, a piece of tape on this part of the car to prevent them making any changes between qualifying and the race. And apparently for next time out in Mexico, maybe it's going to be by Brazil, Red Bull are actually going to make fundamental changes to the design of the car to prevent them being able to change it, potentially at least, while this is going on, or at least make it more inaccessible when the car is put together. I don't know, but there's going to be some sort of changes from Red Bull to make the FIA satisfied that they couldn't potentially be tweaking it, which maybe implies that potentially they could. And that's kind of what McLaren were getting at. And of course, Toto Wolff says that pretty outrageous device. And Toto did a great bit of trash talking here where he said that this like socket, and they use this stick, well that's at least what they showed the FIA, putting this stick in the car, this broom device, and people have been calling it a Bugs Bunny device, and Wolff says, I didn't know that in F1 we were using such Bugs Bunny devices. It's not good enough to say that this is it and we promise we're not going to do it again. So I think Wolff is kind of implying that the way that Red Bull showed the FIA, oh hey yeah, we have to use this big long stick to change it, and we have to go like this, and we have to take off the nose cone and all this. Like, I don't think Wolff buys it. I think his theory is that actually maybe they could access it and they could change it if they wanted to, but the way they showed the FIA was a super complicated roundabout way, and therefore there's no way we could possibly change it under parc ferme. I think that's kind of what Wolff and seemingly Zak Brown seem to believe. Whether that's fair, that's a question, but Zak Brown then kind of requested Red Bull put together a document where their entire employee line, their mechanics, like all the team, sign the document and they say, hey, we never used it, we never changed under parc ferme, and that didn't happen. Now, let's be real, are Red Bull going to do this? No. Is this just to gain PR points publicly from Zak Brown and McLaren? Probably yes. But it does raise an interesting question. Of course, Rob Myers is a controversial character on F1 Twitter, but I thought I'd just share what he had to say, because his assessment was that, well, if they want this kind of document to confirm that the internal bib adjuster had never been used under parc ferme, then, why can't Red Bull just do that, right? Just get the boys to sign it if they never did it. Fair enough. And therefore, kind of the speculation was, well, would Zak Brown request this if he didn't have, reason to believe that somebody had done something? I think, that was the rumour anyway, that former Red Bull employees had told McLaren about this, therefore they reported it. So the argument might be that he might know something that maybe somebody before has told him that, yeah, actually we did change it at this specific race, and therefore Zak Brown wants some, he wants proof that they actually did it, and maybe the proof is that nobody signs this letter. I don't know. The reality is Zak Brown's probably not going to get his letter, but I do think it was interesting that, yes, in sprint quali and in main quali, or in the main sprint race, Verstappen had good pace, no questions at all, but to be fair, didn't have insane pace, because, yes, he set the fastest up on the final lap, but the Ferraris were close enough, and of course McLaren came back strongly in the race on the Sunday. So if this front bib trick was real, we were expecting to see some bigger delta between quali performance and race performance, because they wouldn't be able to no longer compromise. And to be fair, there is evidence we saw something like that. Verstappen clearly had the fastest car in quali conditions by a margin, but in the race, he was third best behind the Ferraris and then behind the McLarens in the end. I mean, Norris had more pace and was able to catch up and nearly overtake at the end of the Grand Prix, and maybe should have overtaken, as we talked about earlier in the video, right? So, I think McLaren can come out of the weekend and Mercedes can come out of the weekend and say, you know what, if Red Bull were actually doing something like that, there was evidence between qualifying and the race that would kind of back up those claims, because they didn't maintain their competitiveness across both conditions, which would have been expected had they been able to do this. So, it's interesting. I don't know the answers, but as ever, I'm very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.